Black girl with a hidden voice silences the whole school with the most insane singing. The first time Amara Johnson heard the whispers, she was standing at her locker, pulling out her worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The voices drifted from behind her like smoke, soft enough to pretend she didn't hear them, loud enough to cut deep. "That's her," a girl's voice said. "The one who never talks. I heard she's mute or something." Another voice chimed in. "Like, actually can't speak." "No, she's just weird. My cousin went to her old school. Said she got kicked out for fighting." Amara's fingers tightened around her book. None of it was true, but the truth was somehow worse. She wasn't mute. She was scared. Scared that if she opened her mouth, if she let even one word slip out, everything else would come tumbling after. The grief. The anger. The voice that once filled church sanctuaries and brought grown men to tears. The voice her mother had called a gift from God. She slammed her locker shut and pulled her hood up higher, the familiar weight of invisibility settling over her shoulders like armor. Jefferson High School buzzed around her, 4,000 students moving in predictable patterns, forming their tribes, claiming their territories. And there she was, a ghost drifting through their world, touching nothing, claiming no space at all. Amara, girl, wait up. The only voice that could make her stop belonged to Jada Williams. All 5 feet and 2 inches of concentrated sunshine, with box braids that caught the fluorescent light and a smile that refused to be dimmed by anything, including Amara's determination to remain invisible. "You cannot keep running away from me in these hallways," Jada said, slightly out of breath as she caught up. "My legs are too short for this nonsense." Despite herself, Amara felt the corner of her mouth twitch. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the closest thing to one that anyone at Jefferson High had ever seen from her. "I wasn't running," Amara said quietly, her voice rusty from underuse. Even talking to Jada felt like lifting weights, each word requiring effort, each sentence a small victory over the silence that had become her default setting. Jada fell into step beside her, somehow managing to make the crowded hallway feel less overwhelming just by being there. "And I wasn't chasing you. We were both just coincidentally moving very fast in the same direction." They walked past the trophy case, past the bulletin board covered in college acceptance letters and scholarship announcements, past the poster advertising the upcoming spring talent show. Jada's eyes lingered on that last one, and Amara knew what was coming before her friend even opened her mouth. "You know, it's not too late to." "No." The word came out sharper than Amara intended, causing a group of sophomore girls to look their way. She immediately lowered her voice. "We've talked about this." "Have we, though?" "Because talking implies that both people get to speak, and mostly I just listen to you say no in increasingly creative ways." They reached Amara's first period classroom, AP English with Mrs. Rodriguez, who had the unfortunate habit of calling on students at random and expecting them to have profound insights about literature. Amara had learned to sit in the back corner, to make herself small enough that Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes would skip right over her. "Jada," Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please." Something in her tone made Jada stop. Her friend studied her face with those sharp, knowing eyes that saw too much, understood too well. "Okay," Jada said finally. "But you know I'm not giving up on this, right? I'm going to keep asking until you remember who you used to be." The warning bell rang, and students began flowing into classrooms like water finding its level. But Amara stood frozen in the doorway, Jada's words echoing in her head. "Until you remember who you used to be." But that was the problem. She remembered exactly who she used to be. She remembered the girl who sang in church every Sunday, whose voice could make the congregation weep and shout and praise God all at once. She remembered the girl who practiced scales with her mother in their tiny apartment kitchen, harmonizing over morning coffee and burnt toast. She remembered the girl who believed her voice was a gift. And that girl was gone, had died right alongside her mother in that hospital room 2 years ago, when the machine stopped beeping and the silence that followed was so complete, so devastating, that Amara had vowed never to fill another silence again. "Miss Johnson." Mrs. Rodriguez's voice snapped her back to the present. The classroom was full now, 28 pairs of eyes staring at her as she stood in the doorway like a statue. "Are you planning to join us today?" Heat flooded Amara's cheeks. She nodded quickly and slipped into her usual seat in the back corner, pulling out her notebook and trying to disappear again. But she could feel their stares, could hear the whispers starting up again. Weird. Mute girl. What's her problem? Mrs. Rodriguez began discussing the symbolism in Chapter 12, something about mockingbirds and innocence lost, but Amara barely heard her. Her mind was stuck on Jada's words, on the talent show poster, on the memory of her mother's voice saying, "Your gift is meant to be shared, baby girl. God doesn't give us talents to hide them under bushel baskets." But what if God had made a mistake? What if some gifts were too dangerous to unwrap? What if opening her mouth would mean opening floodgates she didn't know how to close? Through the window, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. Amara stared out at them and wondered if it was possible to disappear completely, to fade away like morning mist until even she couldn't remember who she used to be. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it terrified her more than singing ever could. The cafeteria at Jefferson High was a battlefield disguised as a lunchroom. Every table represented a different territory, each group defending their social status with the fierce protection of medieval kingdoms. The athletes claimed the center tables, basking in their proximity to the lunch line and the envious stares of underclassmen. The theater kids occupied the corner near the windows, their animated conversations creating a bubble of drama and artistic angst. The honor students held court near the vending machines, their advanced textbooks serving as both shields and status symbols. And then there was Amara's table. It wasn't really her table, of course. She had no claim to any territory in this social ecosystem. But Jada had declared the small two-seater near the emergency exit to be their Switzerland, neutral ground where a chatty theater kid and a silent transfer student could coexist without drawing too much attention. Today, however, attention seemed to be exactly what they were getting. "Don't look now," Jada said, unwrapping her turkey sandwich with deliberate casualness. "But Skylar James keeps staring over here." Amara's stomach dropped. She knew without looking that Jada was right. She could feel those ice blue eyes on her, could sense the calculation behind them. Skylar James was Jefferson High royalty, senior class president, three-time talent show winner, and the kind of girl who made even the prettiest cheerleaders feel inadequate. She was also the kind of girl who noticed everything and forgot nothing, which made her attention both coveted and dangerous. Why would she? Amara began, but her voice died as Skylar herself approached their table. Skylar moved through the cafeteria like she owned it, which, in many ways, she did. Her blonde hair caught the fluorescent light like spun gold, and her smile was the kind that launched 1,000 homecoming campaigns. She was trailed by her usual entourage, Madison, Brittany, and Chloe, whose names Amara only knew because they were announced over the intercom every morning for various achievements and accolades. "Hi," Skylar said, her voice sweet as artificial honey. "You're Amara, right? The transfer student." Amara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Up close, Skylar was even more intimidating. Perfect skin, perfect teeth, perfect everything. She was the kind of girl who made other girls want to check their appearance in reflective surfaces, the kind who seemed to exist in her own personal spotlight. "I'm Skylar. I don't think we've officially met." She extended a manicured hand, and Amara had no choice but to shake it. Skylar's grip was firm, confident, the handshake of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "I've heard so much about you," Skylar continued, her tone suggesting that what she'd heard was fascinating rather than concerning. "The mysterious new girl who never speaks. It's very intriguing." Jada's fork clattered against her lunch tray. "She speaks. She's speaking right now, actually. We were just having a whole conversation before you." "Were you?" Skylar's smile widened, but her eyes remained calculating. "That's wonderful. I love meeting new people, especially ones with hidden depths." She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a challenge. "You know, we should really get to know each other better. Maybe you could come sit with us sometime." She gestured toward the center tables, where her usual crowd was watching the interaction with poorly concealed curiosity. The invitation should have been flattering, a golden ticket to the upper echelons of Jefferson High's social hierarchy. Instead, it felt like being invited into a spider's web. "That's really nice of you," Jada said when it became clear that Amara wasn't going to respond. "But we're good here. We like our little corner." "Of course you do." Skylar's tone remained sweet, but something sharp flickered behind her eyes. "It's so cozy, so private. You can really hear yourselves think, can't you?" The emphasis on here felt deliberate, loaded with meaning that Amara couldn't quite decipher. But before she could analyze it further, Skylar was speaking again. Actually, I'm glad I ran into you both. Have you seen the posters for the Spring Talent Show? It's going to be absolutely amazing this year. I'm performing a medley from Hamilton. You know, the Broadway musical? It's quite challenging, vocally speaking. Requires a lot of range. Again, that emphasis, that suggestion of hidden meaning. Amara felt heat rising in her cheeks, a familiar flush of shame and confusion. That sounds amazing, Jada said, her voice carefully neutral. You must have been practicing for months. Oh, I have. I take it very seriously. Talent isn't something you can fake, you know? Either you have it or you don't. Either you can perform under pressure or you can't. Skylar's gaze landed on Amara again, and this time there was no mistaking the challenge in her eyes. I imagine it takes a lot of courage to get up on stage and sing in front of the whole school. Some people just aren't cut out for that kind of exposure. The words hit Amara like physical blows. Because Skylar was right, she wasn't cut out for exposure. She was cut out for shadows, for silence, for the safety of being invisible. The old Amara, the one who used to fill sanctuaries with song, felt like a different person entirely. A braver person. A person who no longer existed. Well, Skylar said, checking her phone with theatrical precision. I should get back to my table. Madison's probably wondering where I went. But it was so nice talking to you both. Really, illuminating. She turned to leave, her entourage falling into formation behind her like well-trained soldiers. But then she paused, as if struck by a sudden thought. Oh, and Amara, if you ever want to come hear me practice, you're welcome to. I use the music room after school most days. You might learn something. The invitation was delivered with a smile, but it felt like a dare. Or maybe a threat. As Skylar glided away, her laughter floating back to their table like expensive perfume, Jada let out a low whistle. Well, that was subtle as a brick to the face, she said. What do you think that was about? But Amara was already standing, gathering her untouched lunch and her backpack with shaking hands. The cafeteria suddenly felt too small, too loud, too full of watching eyes and whispered judgments. I need to go, she said, her voice barely audible over the lunchroom noise. Amara, wait. But she was already moving, weaving between tables and dodging curious stares as she made her way to the exit. Behind her, she could hear Jada calling her name, could feel the weight of 100 different gazes following her retreat. She burst through the cafeteria doors and into the empty hallway, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects, and her reflection in the trophy case looked pale and ghostly. Either you have it or you don't. Skylar's words echoed in her head, mixing with older voices, crueler ones. The kids at her old school who had whispered behind her back after her mother's death, who had watched her stumble through a song at the memorial service and shake their heads in disappointment. She used to be so good. What happened to her? I guess grief killed her voice. Maybe they were right. Maybe some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. Maybe some silences were meant to be permanent. Amara pressed her back against the cold metal of a locker and closed her eyes, trying to remember what her mother's voice sounded like when she sang. But all she could hear was the buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of 4,000 students who had voices and weren't afraid to use them. The tears came without warning, hot and angry and full of 2 years' worth of swallowed words. She wiped them away quickly, glancing around to make sure no one had seen. But the hallway was empty, mercifully quiet, and for just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to fill that silence with song. The thought was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, and completely, utterly impossible. 3 weeks later, Amara discovered that her best friend was both a liar and a saint. She found out during 5th period chemistry, when Mrs. Chun called her to the front of the class to collect a note from the main office. The walk of shame down the center aisle felt endless, 26 pairs of eyes tracking her movement as her sneakers squeaked against the linoleum floor. The note was written on official Jefferson High letterhead, crisp and formal in a way that made Amara's stomach clench with anxiety. Dear Miss Johnson, please report to the music department after school today to discuss your talent show audition. Mrs. Patterson will be available until 4:30 p.m. Sincerely, M.S. Rodriguez, Assistant Principal. Amara read the note, 3 times before the words fully registered. Then she read it twice more, hoping the letters would rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Talent show audition. The phrase felt foreign in her mind, like words from a language she used to speak but had long forgotten. She hadn't signed up for any audition. She hadn't even looked at the talent show posters since that day in the cafeteria with Skylar. The very idea of performing in front of the entire school made her palms sweat and her throat close up, which meant someone else had signed her up. Someone with box braids and an unshakable belief in second chances. The rest of chemistry passed in a blur of half-heard explanations about molecular bonds and periodic tables. Amara's mind was spinning, cycling through a dozen different emotions: anger, betrayal, terror, and underneath it all, a tiny, treacherous spark of something that might have been excitement. When the final bell rang, she didn't even pretend to head toward her locker. Instead, she marched straight to the theater department, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways with military precision. She found Jada in the costume closet, hanging up period dresses from the drama club's recent production of Our Town. Her friend looked up as Amara entered, and the guilty expression that flickered across her face confirmed everything. "Before you say anything," Jada began, "you signed me up." Amara's voice was quieter than she intended, but somehow more devastating because of it. "For the talent show?" Without asking me, Jada set down the dress she was holding and faced her friend with the kind of calm that came from absolute certainty in one's moral position. "Yes, I did." "How could you?" The words came out strangled, full of hurt and betrayal. "I told you no. I told you 100 times no. And I heard you." Jada's voice was steady, unflinching. "But I also see you, Amara. I see you humming under your breath when you think no one's listening. I see you mouthing along to songs on the radio. I see the way your fingers move like you're playing piano when you're nervous. That doesn't mean. I see the way your face lights up whenever music comes on, and then how fast you shut it down. Like you're not allowed to feel joy anymore. Like enjoying music would be betraying your mom's memory or something." The words hit like a physical blow, so accurate they took Amara's breath away. Because that's exactly what it felt like: betrayal. How could she sing when her mother couldn't? How could she use the gift they'd shared when half of their harmony was gone forever? "You don't understand," Amara whispered. "Then help me understand." Jada stepped closer, her voice gentle but insistent. "Tell me why you're so afraid of your own voice." For a moment, Amara considered it. Considered opening her mouth and letting everything pour out. The grief, the guilt, the way music had become both a comfort and a wound she couldn't stop picking. But the words felt too big, too dangerous. If she started talking about her mother, about the songs they used to share, she might never stop crying. Instead, she shook her head and turned toward the door. "I'm not going to the audition." "Yes, you are." The certainty in Jada's voice made Amara stop. She turned back to find her friend holding a piece of paper, the sign-up sheet, with Amara's name written in Jada's familiar handwriting. "You're number 37, Jada said. Last on the list. Which means if you don't show up, Mrs. Patterson will come looking for you. And then she'll ask questions, and you'll have to explain why you're backing out, and everyone will know that Amara Johnson was too scared to even audition." It was manipulation, pure and simple. But it was also effective. "I hate you," Amara said, but there was no real anger in it anymore. Just exhaustion and a bone-deep weariness that came from fighting herself for so long. "I know," Jada said cheerfully. "You can hate me all the way to the music room." Mrs. Patterson was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes who had been teaching music at Jefferson High for longer than some of her students had been alive. Her room was a sanctuary of organized chaos, sheet music stacked on every surface, instruments hanging from walls, and inspirational posters featuring famous musicians and composers scattered between the windows. When Amara knocked on the door frame, Mrs. Patterson looked up from her piano with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased rather than surprised. "Amara, I was wondering if you'd make it. Come in, come in." The music room felt different after school hours, quieter, more intimate. Without the usual crowd of band kids and choir members, it seemed larger somehow, full of possibilities and echoes of 1,000 different songs. "I should probably mention," Amara said, hovering near the doorway like a flight risk, "I didn't actually sign up for this. My friend, Jada Williams, yes. She mentioned that when she dropped off the form." Mrs. Patterson's tone was matter-of-fact. as if having friends forge talent show applications was a perfectly normal occurrence. Lovely girl, very passionate about supporting her friends' artistic development. She had no right to. She told me you used to sing. Mrs. Patterson interrupted gently. Before you transferred here. She said you have a beautiful voice, but haven't performed in a while. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implication and invitation. Amara felt her throat tighten, her body's automatic response to any mention of her musical past. That was a long time ago. Music isn't like riding a bicycle, Mrs. Patterson said, settling back onto her piano bench. It's more like breathing. You might hold your breath for a while, but eventually, you have to let it out. Despite herself, Amara found herself moving deeper into the room, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. The piano was a baby grand, black and glossy, its surface reflecting the afternoon light streaming through the windows. I can't, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Can't or won't? Mrs. Patterson asked, her fingers finding the keys and beginning a simple melody, something soft and familiar that made Amara's chest ache with recognition. It was Amazing Grace, played in a key she knew by heart, in a style that reminded her of Sunday mornings and her mother's voice soaring over the congregation. Please don't, Amara whispered. But Mrs. Patterson continued playing, the melody weaving through the room like a gentle current, pulling at memories Amara had tried so hard to bury. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. The words appeared in her mind without permission, in her mother's voice, clear and strong and full of faith. Amara closed her eyes, fighting against the pull of the music, against the way it made her heart race and her soul ache. That saved a wretch like me. Your mother sang this song, Mrs. Patterson said softly, never missing a note. At church, gospel style. Jada told me. Amara's eyes snapped open. She had no right to tell you that. She's worried about you. She says you haven't sung a single note since you got here. Not even humming in the hallways. Because I can't. The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. I can't sing anymore. My voice it's gone. Broken. When she died, it died too. Mrs. Patterson's hands stilled on the keys, and the sudden silence felt enormous. Your mother, she said carefully. What would she say if she could see you now? The question was like a knife between her ribs, precise and devastating. Because Amara knew exactly what her mother would say. She could hear the disappointment, the gentle correction that had guided her through 1,000 practice sessions. Baby girl, God doesn't take gifts away. We just forget how to use them. She'd tell me to sing. Amara whispered, the admission tearing at her throat. Then maybe you should listen to her. Mrs. Patterson began playing again, but this time it was different. Not Amazing Grace, but something original, something that seemed to bloom from the keys like flowers after rain. The melody was simple but beautiful, the kind of song that begged for words, for voice, for the human touch that turned notes into meaning. I don't know if I remember how, Amara said. Let's find out together. And before she could stop herself, before fear could build its familiar walls around her throat, Amara opened her mouth and let the first note escape. It was rough, uncertain, like a rusty gate creaking open after years of disuse. But it was hers. Her voice, her breath, her music coming back to life in the golden afternoon light of the music room. Mrs. Patterson smiled and kept playing, giving Amara space to find her way back to herself, one tentative note at a time. For the first time in 2 years, the silence was broken, and it sounded like coming home. The morning of the talent show arrived gray and drizzling, as if the sky itself was reflecting Amara's mood. She had barely slept, her mind cycling through every possible disaster scenario, forgetting the words, her voice cracking, the entire school laughing at her attempt to reclaim something she'd lost so long ago. She stood at her bedroom window, watching rain streak down the glass, and wondered if it was too late to fake food poisoning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jada. Big day? You ready to blow everyone's minds? Amara typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on. As ready as someone can be for public humiliation. That's the spirit. See you at lunch. We need to talk strategy. Strategy. As if there were tactics for resurrection, battle plans for bringing the dead back to life. Amara pulled on her clothes, dark jeans and a soft gray sweater that made her feel invisible, and tried to ignore the way her hands shook as she brushed her teeth. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every class felt like an eternity. Every teacher's voice a distant drone that couldn't penetrate the fog of anxiety surrounding her thoughts. By lunchtime, her stomach was twisted in knots so tight she couldn't even pretend to eat. "You're going to be fine," Jada said, sliding into the seat across from her with characteristic confidence. "Better than fine. You're going to be amazing. What if I forget the words?" Amara pushed her untouched sandwich around her plate, unable to meet her friend's eyes. "You won't. You've been practicing for 2 weeks straight. What if my voice cracks?" "It won't." "What if?" "Amara." Jada reached across the table and grabbed her hands, stilling their nervous fidgeting. "Look at me." Reluctantly, Amara raised her eyes to meet her friend's steady gaze. "Your mom would be so proud," Jada said quietly. "You know that, right?" The words hit like a punch to the solar plexus, beautiful and painful at the same time. Because yes, Amara thought her mother would be proud. But she also thought her mother would be terrified for her, knowing how much courage it took to step back onto a stage after so long in the shadows. The rest of lunch passed in a blur of last-minute encouragement and tactical discussions. Jada had thought of everything. What Amara should eat before performing. Nothing too heavy. What she should wear, something that made her feel confident. Even what she should do with her hands. Let them move naturally with the music. But as they walked toward their afternoon classes, Jada suddenly stopped. "Shit," she said, staring at something over Amara's shoulder. "What?" Jada nodded toward the main bulletin board, where a crowd of students had gathered around the talent show sign-up sheet. The same sheet that had been hanging there for weeks. The same sheet that listed Amara as performer number 37. The same sheet that was now dripping wet and largely illegible. "What happened?" Amara pushed through the crowd, her heart sinking as she got a closer look. Someone had accidentally spilled what looked like grape juice all over the sign-up sheet. Purple liquid had soaked through the paper, turning most of the names into indecipherable smears. "Oh my God," Madison Chin was saying, her voice full of theatrical dismay. "This is such a disaster. How will we know who's supposed to perform tonight?" "Well, obviously we'll have to go with the backup list," Skylar James replied, appearing at Madison's shoulder with suspiciously perfect timing. "The one Mrs. Patterson keeps in her office with all the confirmed performers." Amara felt ice forming in her veins. "What backup list?" Skylar turned to her with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, hi, Amara. I was just explaining about Mrs. Patterson's official roster. The one with all the people who actually auditioned and were approved for tonight's show." "I auditioned," Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you?" Skylar tilted her head, as if this was the first she'd heard of it. "That's so strange. I don't remember seeing your name on the official list when I helped Mrs. Patterson organize it yesterday afternoon." The crowd around them had grown, drawn by the drama unfolding in real time. Amara could feel their eyes on her, could hear the whispers starting. "She auditioned? I thought she didn't talk. This is awkward." "There has to be a mistake," Jada said, stepping forward with fire in her eyes. "She's been preparing for weeks." "Oh, I'm sure she has," Skylar replied, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "But you know how these things work. There are limited spots, and we can't just let anyone perform. There's a certain standard to maintain." The word standard landed like a slap, because everyone knew what she really meant. There were standards for who belonged on the Jefferson High stage, standards that had nothing to do with talent and everything to do with social hierarchy. Standards that girls like Amara didn't meet. "This is bullshit," Jada said, loud enough for the growing crowd to hear. "You can't just—" "I didn't do anything," Skylar interrupted, her voice rising just enough to sound defensive while maintaining her air of injured innocence. "I'm as disappointed as anyone that the sign-up sheet got ruined. But rules are rules. The show must go on." She turned to address the crowd, every inch the gracious leader taking charge in a crisis. "Don't worry, everyone. We'll make sure tonight's show is absolutely amazing, even without the unofficial additions." The dismissal was clear, brutal, and completely public. Amara stood frozen in the center of the crowd, feeling exposed and humiliated in a way that made her wish she could disappear entirely. "Come on," Jada said, grabbing her arm. "We're going to Mrs. Patterson. This isn't over." But as they pushed through the dispersing crowd, Amara caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. There, partially hidden behind her textbook, was Skylar's phone. The screen was lit up with text messages, and even from several feet away, Amara could see the preview of the most recent one. Mission accomplished. She won't be singing tonight. The sender's name was partially obscured, but Amara could make out enough letters to piece it together. Brittany. The sabotage wasn't accidental. It was planned, coordinated, designed to humiliate her as publicly as possible. And it had worked perfectly. Mrs. Patterson's office was a hurricane of sheet music and costume pieces, the organized chaos of someone preparing for a major production. When Jada burst through the door with Amara trailing behind her, the music teacher looked up from her clipboard with mild surprise. "Girls, is everything all right? You both look." "Someone destroyed the sign-up sheet," Jada announced without preamble. "And now Skylar James is saying Amara was never on the official roster." Mrs. Patterson's expression darkened. "I see. And what does the backup list say?" "That's what we're here to find out," Jada replied, while Amara remained silent, still reeling from the discovery of Skylar's text messages. Mrs. Patterson moved to her filing cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Talent Show, Spring 2025. She flipped through several pages before finding what she was looking for. "Here we are," she said, running her finger down a typed list. "Official roster of approved performers, in order of appearance." Amara held her breath. "Number 37, Mrs. Patterson read aloud. Amara Johnson, vocal performance." The relief was so intense it made Amara's knees weak. She was still on the list, still scheduled to perform. Still. However, Mrs. Patterson continued, and Amara's heart sank. "There's a note here that concerns me." She held up the paper so they could see. There, next to Amara's name, someone had written in red ink, "Unconfirmed, needs second audition." "I didn't write this," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice tight with anger. "Someone added this to my official roster without permission." "Can you tell who?" Jada asked, though they all suspected the answer. Mrs. Patterson examined the handwriting more closely. It looks like Skylar's writing, actually. She's been helping me organize the show, and I recognize her penmanship." The confirmation hit like a physical blow. Skylar hadn't just sabotaged the public sign-up sheet. She'd tampered with official documents. She'd used her position as Mrs. Patterson's assistant to systematically eliminate Amara from the show. "What does this mean?" Amara asked, finding her voice for the first time since entering the office. Mrs. Patterson set down the paper and looked at her with kind but serious eyes. "It means someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to keep you from performing tonight. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Because this was more than just a talent show now. This was about whether Amara was going to let fear and sabotage silence her again, or whether she was finally ready to fight for her right to be heard. Outside the office windows, the rain had stopped, and thin shafts of sunlight were breaking through the clouds. "I want to sing," Amara said quietly. "Then you'll sing," Mrs. Patterson replied with fierce determination. "Tonight. Last on the program. I'll make sure of it." For the first time all day, Amara felt something that might have been hope. It was a fragile thing, easily broken, but it was hers, and no one was going to take it away from her again. By 6 o'clock that evening, Jefferson High's gymnasium had been transformed into something resembling a real theater. The drama club had strung lights across the ceiling, creating pools of warm illumination that softened the harsh fluorescent glare. Rows of folding chairs faced a makeshift stage, complete with curtains borrowed from the auditorium and a sound system that had seen better days but still worked. Amara stood in the girls' locker room, which had been designated as the performer's dressing area, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She had changed into the outfit Jada had helped her pick out. A simple black dress that skimmed her knees, paired with her mother's silver necklace, the one with the tiny musical note pendant that caught the light when she moved. "You look beautiful," Jada said, appearing behind her with a makeup bag and a determined expression. "Now hold still so I can work my magic." "I don't need." "Yes, you do. Stage lights wash everyone out. Trust me on this." As Jada applied foundation and mascara with the expertise of someone who had spent 4 years in drama club, Amara tried to calm her racing heart. Through the thin walls of the locker room, she could hear the gymnasium filling up with people, parents, students, teachers, all settling in for an evening of teenage talent and amateur entertainment. "How many people do you think are out there?" she asked, immediately regretting the question. Don't think about that, Jada replied, focusing intently on Amara's eyeliner. Think about the song. Think about your mom. Think about showing everyone what they've been missing. The song Amara had chosen carefully, settling on a piece that felt both deeply personal and universally relatable. Not a gospel song that felt too raw, too connected to memories she wasn't ready to share with strangers. Instead, she'd picked Rise Up by Andrew Day, a song about resilience and finding strength in darkness. A song that felt like it had been written for this moment. 5 minutes to showtime. Mrs. Patterson's voice echoed through the locker room, causing a flutter of nervous energy among the dozen performers scattered around the space. Amara watched as her fellow students made final adjustments to costumes and practiced last-minute choreography. There was Marcus Williams, a sophomore who was going to perform a stand-up comedy routine about cafeteria food. Sarah Chun, a junior who had choreographed an elaborate dance to a K-pop song. The Hamilton twins, who played violin and cello respectively, and were planning to perform a classical duet. And somewhere out in the gymnasium, probably holding court in the front row, was Skylar James, preparing to deliver what everyone expected would be the performance of the evening. Places everyone, Mrs. Patterson called out. Opening number starts in 3 minutes. The performers began filing out toward the stage entrance, their nervous chatter filling the hallway. Amara hung back, her palms sweaty and her throat tight with anxiety. You're going last, Jada reminded her. That means you have time to watch a few acts, get a feel for the audience. Plus, going last is actually perfect. It's the spot everyone remembers. Amara nodded, trying to believe it. But going last also meant sitting through an hour and a half of other people's performances, each one building the audience's expectations higher and higher. By the time her name was called, everyone would be tired, restless, ready to go home. She was about to voice this concern when a commotion in the hallway caught her attention. Raised voices, someone arguing with Mrs. Patterson, the sound of heavy footsteps that seemed out of place among the light excitement of students and parents. I don't care what your stupid list says. A male voice slurred, loud and belligerent. That's my daughter in there, and I have every right to see her perform. Amara's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice, knew the particular way it got thick and unpredictable when alcohol was involved. She had heard it countless times over the past 2 years, usually followed by tears, apologies, and promises that never lasted more than a few weeks. Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Patterson was saying, her voice carefully diplomatic, I understand you want to support Amara, but you can't come into the school in this condition. What condition? David Johnson's voice rose another octave, defensive and aggressive. I'm fine. I'm here to see my baby girl sing, just like her mommy used to. The mention of her mother hit Amara like a physical blow. Because her father had no right to invoke her memory, not when he was the one who had checked out completely after the funeral, leaving Amara to navigate her grief alone while he disappeared into a bottle of cheap whiskey. I need to go, Amara whispered to Jada, backing toward the locker room door. I can't do this. Not with him here. But Jada caught her arm, her grip firm and unyielding. No, she said, her voice fierce. You are not letting him take this away from you. Not tonight. You don't understand, Amara said, panic rising in her throat. He's drunk. He'll make a scene. He'll embarrass me in front of everyone. So what? Jada's eyes blazed with protective fury. So what if he makes a scene? That's on him, not you. You have been working toward this moment for weeks. You have been finding your voice again, piece by piece, note by note. And you are not going to let his issues steal that from you. In the hallway, the argument was escalating. Mrs. Patterson had apparently called security because Amara could hear Mr. Rodriguez, the assistant principal, trying to de-escalate the situation. Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside, he was saying. We can discuss this in my office tomorrow, but tonight. Don't you dare tell me what I can and can't do, David Johnson interrupted. I'm her father. I've missed too much already. I'm not missing this. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, even through the alcohol and anger. Because he was right, he had missed too much. 2 years of birthdays, school events, quiet dinners, and bedtime conversations. 2 years of watching his daughter disappear into silence while he disappeared into grief. But that didn't give him the right to show up now, drunk and belligerent, expecting to claim his place in her story. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Jefferson High School's Spring Talent Show. The opening announcements had begun, Mrs. Patterson's voice carrying over the sound system while she simultaneously tried to manage the crisis in the hallway. Amara could hear applause, the settling of hundreds of people in their seats, the beginning of something she had been preparing for but no longer felt capable of facing. "I can't," she whispered again, but with less conviction this time. Because through the chaos and fear and humiliation, she could hear something else. Her mother's voice, not from memory this time, but from somewhere deeper. A presence that felt real and warm and unshakably certain. "Baby girl, you don't sing for other people. You sing for yourself. You sing because you have to, because the music in your heart won't let you stay silent. Your mom," Jada said softly, as if she had heard the same voice, "would want you to sing tonight, regardless of who's in the audience, regardless of who's making noise in the hallway. She would want you to use the gift she helped you discover." Amara closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to find that place of certainty her mother had always radiated. When she opened them again, something had shifted. The fear was still there, but it no longer felt like the most important thing in the room. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I'm going to do this." "Damn right you are," Jada replied with a grin that could have powered the entire gymnasium. In the hallway, the argument seemed to be winding down. Security had apparently convinced her father to wait in the parking lot, though Amara could still hear his voice, fainter now, still protesting his exile from her moment. But as she listened, she realized something that surprised her. Underneath the anger and alcohol, underneath the 2 years of absence and disappointment, her father sounded heartbroken. He sounded like a man who had lost everything that mattered and was desperately trying to find his way back to the one piece of his old life that remained. He sounded like her. Maybe they were more alike than she wanted to admit. Maybe they had both been drowning in the same ocean of grief, just using different methods to avoid going under. The thought didn't excuse his behavior, didn't make his abandonment hurt any less. But it made him human again, instead of just the villain in her story. And maybe, if she could find the courage to sing tonight, it would be a step toward forgiveness for both of them. First up, Mrs. Patterson announced from the stage, "Please welcome Marcus Williams with his comedy routine, mystery meat, and other cafeteria adventures." The show had begun. In 90 minutes, Amara would walk out onto that stage and either reclaim her voice or lose it forever. She spent the next few minutes in the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face and practicing breathing exercises her mother had taught her years ago. In for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. A rhythm like a heartbeat, steady and reliable and unafraid. When she emerged, Jada was waiting for her with a bottle of water and a folding chair position where they could see the stage through a crack in the curtains. "Come on," Jada said. "Let's watch the competition." They settled in to observe their fellow students' moments in the spotlight, each performance adding to the electricity in the room. Some acts were polished and confident, others charmingly amateur. The audience was generous with their applause, supportive of every effort regardless of skill level. But Amara barely registered any of it. Her attention kept drifting to the parking lot visible through the small window near the stage entrance. She could see her father's silhouette there, leaning against his beat-up Honda Civic, cigarette glowing in the darkness. Waiting. Despite everything, he was still waiting for her. By the time Skylar James took the stage for her Hamilton medley, the gymnasium was electric with anticipation. She had spent the entire evening holding court in the front row, graciously accepting compliments on her sequin costume and making sure everyone knew she had been working with a professional vocal coach for months. Amara watched from the wings as Skylar commanded the stage with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her right to be there. Her voice was technically proficient, her choreography sharp, her stage presence undeniable. The audience ate it up, clapping along to the familiar Broadway rhythms and cheering at the song's most demanding vocal runs. It was, objectively, an impressive performance. It was also cold as polished marble, all technical skill and no soul. "She's good," Jada whispered beside her. "Yeah," Amara replied, and meant it. "She is." But as she watched Skylar hit every note with mechanical precision, Amara realized something that surprised her. She wasn't intimidated anymore. She wasn't comparing herself or wondering if she measured up to Jefferson High's Golden Girl, because they were different kinds of performers entirely. Skylar sang to impress, to dazzle, to prove her superiority. She sang from her head, calculating every gesture and inflection for maximum impact. Amara sang from somewhere deeper, from the place where music lived before it became performance, where songs were prayers and voices were bridges between the human and the divine. Her mother had taught her that distinction years ago, during one of their kitchen rehearsals. Technical skill will take you far, baby girl, but it won't take you home. People don't remember perfect pitch. They remember how you made them feel. Skylar's performance ended to thunderous applause and a standing ovation from her friends. She took her bows with queenly grace, soaking up the adoration like she was born for it. "Thank you, Skylar," Mrs. Patterson said as she returned to the microphone. "Absolutely stunning, as always." The audience began to settle back into their seats, rustling programs and checking phones, the energy starting to dissipate as they prepared for the evening to wind down. "Now," Mrs. Patterson continued, "we have one final performance for you tonight. A last-minute addition to our program, but sometimes the best surprises come at the end." Amara felt her heart slam against her ribs. This was it, her moment. The culmination of 2 years of silence and 2 weeks of terrified preparation. Please welcome to the stage Amara Johnson, performing Rise Up by Andrew Day. The applause was polite but scattered, the sound of an audience that didn't know what to expect from the quiet girl they'd barely noticed in the hallways. Amara could see people checking their programs, confused by a name that hadn't been on the original publicity materials. She stood in the wings, frozen by the enormity of the moment. Through the small window, she could see her father had moved closer to the building, his face pressed against the glass like a child outside a candy store. "You've got this," Jada whispered, giving her hand a final squeeze. "Remember who you are." And then there was no more time for fear or doubt or second-guessing. The lights dimmed, Mrs. Patterson gestured toward the wings, and Amara walked out onto the stage. The first thing that hit her was the silence. 400 people, all watching, all waiting, all wondering what this unknown girl thought she was going to show them that they hadn't already seen. The second thing was the lights, brighter than she expected, hot and blinding in a way that made the audience invisible beyond the first few rows. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe it would be easier to sing to shadows than to faces. She reached the center of the stage and looked out at the sea of silhouettes, her mouth dry and her hands shaking. Somewhere in that darkness was everyone who had ever doubted her, dismissed her, written her off as too quiet, too weird, too broken to matter. Somewhere in that darkness was also everyone who believed in her. Jada, Mrs. Patterson, maybe even her father, despite everything. But mostly, somewhere in that darkness was herself. The girl she used to be and the woman she was becoming, waiting to see if she had the courage to bridge the gap between them. The opening piano notes began, soft and hesitant, giving her space to find her footing. Mrs. Patterson had offered to accompany her, and now Amara was grateful for the familiar presence at the keyboard, the steady rhythm that would carry her through whatever came next. She opened her mouth for the first line and nearly choked on it. "You're broken down and tired." Her voice cracked on broken, the words splitting like old wood under pressure. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Amara heard what might have been a snicker from the section where Skylar's friends were sitting. She stopped, her cheeks burning with humiliation. This was exactly what she had been afraid of. This was why she had stayed silent for 2 years, why she had built walls around her voice and kept it locked away where it couldn't disappoint anyone. But then, over the whispered conversations and rustling programs, she heard something that changed everything. Her father's voice, carrying through the window from the parking lot, rough with emotion and alcohol, but unmistakably present. "That's my baby girl up there. That's my daughter. Not perfect, not polished, not the golden child who never failed. Just his daughter. The girl who inherited his stubborn streak and her mother's musical heart, who had been fighting battles he couldn't see and carrying grief he hadn't known how to share." Amara closed her eyes and took a breath that seemed to come from the center of the earth. When she opened them again, the audience was still there, still waiting, but they looked different now. Less like judges and more like people. People who had also been broken down and tired, who had also lost things they couldn't replace, who also knew what it felt like to be afraid of their own voices. She began again. "You're broken down and tired of living life on a merry-go-round." This time, her voice held steady. Not perfect, there was still a tremor in it, a rawness that spoke of disuse and pain, but real, honest, unafraid of its own imperfections. And you can't find the fighter, but I see it in you, so we gonna walk it out. The words began to flow like water finding its course, each phrase building on the last. Her voice grew stronger with every line, muscle memory returning as she remembered what it felt like to use music as language, to communicate things that couldn't be spoken any other way. And move mountains, we gonna walk it out. Somewhere in the third verse, something shifted. The gymnasium grew quieter, conversation stopping as people began to actually listen instead of just waiting for her to finish. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was expectant, electric, the kind of hush that falls over a room when something real is happening. I'll rise up. I'll rise like the day. I'll rise up. I'll rise unafraid. The chorus soared out of her like a bird released from a cage, her voice filling every corner of the gymnasium with sound that was both powerful and vulnerable, technically imperfect and emotionally devastating. This was what her mother had meant about singing from the soul, this complete surrender to the music, this willingness to be broken open by song. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. In the front row, she could see Mrs. Rodriguez dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. 3 rows back, Marcus Williams, who had made everyone laugh with his cafeteria comedy, was staring at the stage with his mouth slightly open, as if he was seeing something he'd never expected. And in the section reserved for performers, Skylar James sat perfectly still, her expression unreadable, her hands clenched in her lap. All we need is hope, and for that we have each other. The bridge was the hardest part, the place where the song demanded everything she had to give. Amara felt her voice crack again, not from nerves this time, but from the sheer emotional weight of what she was singing. Because this wasn't just a song anymore. It was a declaration, a promise, a prayer all rolled into one. And we will rise, we'll rise up, rise up. The final chorus built like a storm, her voice climbing higher and higher until it seemed to touch the ceiling of the gymnasium. She wasn't thinking about technique or performance anymore, wasn't worried about hitting every note perfectly. She was just singing, the way she had sung in her mother's kitchen, the way she had sung in church before grief stole her voice away. I'll rise up, rise like the day, I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. The last note hung in the air for what felt like hours, pure and clear and absolutely fearless. When it finally faded, the silence that followed was so complete that Amara could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the subtle hum of the stage lights overhead. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, someone started clapping. It was slow at first, deliberate, the kind of applause that comes from genuine appreciation rather than mere politeness. Other people joined in, the sound building like waves against a shore, until the entire gymnasium was on its feet, 400 people rising as one to acknowledge something they had witnessed but couldn't quite name. Amara stood in the center of it all, tears streaming down her face, feeling like she might float away from the sheer relief of being heard again, being seen again, being herself again. In the front row, Mrs. Patterson was crying openly, her hands pressed to her heart. Jada was jumping up and down, cheering loud enough to wake the dead. And through the window, barely visible in the parking lot lighting, her father had sunk to his knees, his shoulders shaking with sobs. But it was Skylar's reaction that surprised her most. The girl who had sabotaged her sign-up sheet, who had tried to keep her from performing, was applauding too. Not enthusiastically. Her expression was still complicated, still guarded. But she was clapping, acknowledging something she couldn't deny even if she didn't understand it. The ovation seemed to last forever, washing over Amara in waves of validation and acceptance and something that might have been love. When it finally began to die down, Mrs. Patterson returned to the microphone, her voice thick with emotion. Ladies and gentlemen, Amara Johnson. Another burst of applause, shorter this time, but no less sincere. As Amara walked toward the wings on shaking legs, she caught sight of a familiar figure pushing through the crowd near the back of the gymnasium. Her father, who had somehow talked his way past security, was making his way toward the stage with tears on his face and something that looked like wonder in his eyes. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't run away from him. Instead, she waited. Because some songs, she was learning, were meant to be bridges. And some bridges were strong enough to carry the weight of forgiveness, imperfect and painful and absolutely necessary. As the crowd began to disperse and the other performers gathered around her with congratulations and amazement, Amara felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for too long. Her voice was back. Not the same as it had been before. It was rawer now, scarred by grief and strengthened by survival. But it was hers again, fully and completely, and no one could take it away. In the parking lot afterward, as parents loaded sound equipment and students exchanged contact information and promises to stay in touch, Amara stood with her father beside his beat-up Honda. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, worn down by the same grief that had nearly destroyed her. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out rough and broken. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I should have been there. I should have." "You're here now," she interrupted softly. "That's what matters." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. There was too much hurt, too much lost time for that. But it was a beginning. A first note in what might someday become a song of reconciliation. "Your mama would be so proud," he whispered, pulling her into a hug that smelled like cigarettes and regret and the faint echo of the cologne he used to wear when she was little. "I know," Amara said, and meant it, because she could feel her mother's presence like warmth in her chest, like approval in the way her voice had soared tonight, like love in every note that had poured out of her reborn throat. The gift had never been gone. It had just been waiting for her to be brave enough to use it again. And now, finally, she was. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.